Hey everyone, we're diving right in today. No time to waste because, wow, you've given us a lot to unpack with this climate report. A full presentation, a script, someone's got big plans. Let me guess, you need us to pull out the biggest takeaways from 2024, figure out what it all means on a global scale, and maybe, just maybe, you're looking for a little bit of what can we even do about all of this? Am I close?
Spot on. You've basically read the brief for this deep dive. And let's be real, with a year like 2024, staying informed on this stuff, it's been a job and a half. It seems like every month brought a new climate record, and not the good kind, unfortunately.
Yeah, no kidding. The report doesn't sugarcoat it. Right out of the gate, bam, record-breaking heat. Globally, even hotter than 2023, and that was already a scorcher. But what really makes it hit home are the regional extremes we're seeing. 58 degrees Celsius in South Asia, that's just not livable. I mean, how do societies even function at those temperatures?
You're talking about a complete system breakdown waiting to happen at that point. That kind of heat, it goes way beyond, oh, it's a bit warm today. We're talking infrastructure pushed to its absolute limit, agriculture devastated, and the risks to human health, I mean.
Yeah.
When you see numbers like that, you realize it's no longer just about comfort, it's about survival, basic human survival.
Yeah, it's easy to gloss over a global average, but when you see those regional extremes, that's where it really clicks. Those are the human stories hiding in the data. And it's not just land that's heating up either. The oceans are feeling it too, quite literally.
Absolutely, and that's a whole other can of worms we're opening up. Record high sea surface temperatures, marine heat waves that just drag on for months. We're seeing coral reefs dying off, entire fisheries on the verge of collapse. It's ecosystem collapse in action, not just a statistic. And these warmer oceans, they act like fuel for weather events, supercharging them. Hurricanes, for example, they feed off this excess heat, becoming more intense, less predictable. It's a scary thought.
Case in point, Hurricane Freddy this year, talk about relentless. Madagascar, Mozambique, hit multiple times, and the thing just wouldn't quit. Smashed all the records for how long it lasted.
Freddy's the textbook example of how climate change is making these storms less like, well, storms, and more like unpredictable monsters. We like to think of storms as isolated events, right? Here one day, gone the next. But Freddy just lingered for weeks on end, magnifying the damage with every passing day. It's the new normal, and it's terrifying.
The planet's trying to tell us something, and it's not whispering anymore, that's for sure. And then, on top of the heat, the supercharged storms. 2024 decided to throw in, well, biblical floods.
No other way to put it. The scale of flooding we witnessed this year was unlike anything we've seen. Brazil, for instance, they got hit incredibly hard. 500 to 700 millimeters of rain in just 10 days. To put that in perspective, some places don't even see that in a year. Entire towns underwater, crops destroyed. It's hard to even grasp the scale until you see the images.
And it's like a domino effect, right? Brazil, they're a major player in the global food market. Their crops fail. Suddenly food prices everywhere are through the roof. People on the other side of the world are feeling the impact. And it's not just Brazil. Kenya had their worst floods in decades. Europe's grappling with massive flooding. It's like nowhere is safe.
And that's what we need to remember. We can't afford to see these events in isolation. The heat waves, the floods, the superstorms, they're not isolated incidents. They're all connected. Symptoms of the same underlying problem are changing climate. 2024 was a glimpse into what happens when all these symptoms converge, and it's not a pretty picture.
Yeah, it's a lot to process, no doubt about it, and it's easy to get lost in the numbers, the sheer scale of it all. But what I really want to understand is, what does this mean for people? Because these climate events, they don't exist in a vacuum, right?
Absolutely not. At the end of the day, it's about people. Beyond the headlines, beyond the data points, there are real human lives being upended by these events. And when we talk about the human impact, we have to talk about climate justice. Because one of the most, I think, jarring takeaways from this report is that climate change, it doesn't affect everyone equally.
Yeah, the report uses this really stark phrase, climate apartheid. It definitely grabs your attention, but what does it actually mean in practice?
It's a term that's been around for a while, and it's meant to highlight a very uncomfortable truth. The people who have contributed the least to causing climate change are often the ones bearing the brunt of the consequences.
So the ones who have the least resources to adapt, to cope with these changes.
Exactly. It's about the widening gap between the haves and the have-nots. Wealthier nations, wealthier cities, they can throw money at the problem, right? Seawalls to hold back rising tides, drought-resistant crops, even relocating entire communities. But in parts of the world already struggling with poverty, with inequality, political instability, they're facing these climate impacts with both hands tied behind their backs.
Yeah, it's a recipe for disaster, for instability on a global scale. And speaking of things that could lead to global instability, the report also paints a pretty bleak picture of food security in a hotter, harsher world. I mean, we're already seeing droughts and floods disrupting food production worldwide. With a growing population to feed, how can we possibly keep up when the climate is working against us?
That is the million-dollar question, and there are no easy answers, unfortunately.
The report does mention some potential solutions, though, like vertical farming. Is that like skyscrapers, but for lettuce?
You got it. It sounds like science fiction, but it's becoming reality. Imagine climate-controlled environments stacked vertically, using less land, less water. You can even grow crops year-round in some cases, and it's already happening. Places like Singapore, where land is scarce, they're leading the charge on this.
Okay, so that's promising, but is something like vertical farming enough to solve a global food crisis? And we're talking about a pretty massive issue here.
You're right, technology alone can't save us. We need a multi-pronged approach. Global cooperation is key. Sharing knowledge, resources, investing in sustainable agriculture, especially in developing countries. And we need to be addressing the root causes of food insecurity. It's not just about increasing yields, it's about building more resilient systems.
Right, because this isn't just a tech problem, it's a social problem, a political problem. And, speaking of interconnected issues, this report doesn't shy away from the mental health impacts of climate change either.
No, it doesn't, and it shouldn't, because the mental and emotional toll is very real. We're seeing a rise in climate anxiety, and it's understandable. The constant barrage of bad news, the uncertainty about the future, the feeling of helplessness, it all takes a toll. Especially for young people, they're the ones who are going to inherit this burden.
It makes sense. The world already feels pretty overwhelming for a lot of people, even without the added stress of a planet in crisis. To be facing a future where those worst-case scenarios are becoming more and more likely, that's got to weigh on you.
Absolutely, and the report stresses the need for more mental health resources to address this growing crisis. It's about acknowledging the emotional and psychological impacts of climate change, reducing stigma, and creating support systems.
Okay, so it's heavy stuff, no doubt, but it's not all doom and gloom, right?
Right.
This report, it's not just about sounding the alarm. There's a whole section on potential paths forward, different scenarios for 2030. So is there hope? Can we turn this thing around?
That's the big question, isn't it? The report basically lays out two very different paths. They call them the path of inertia and the path of radical transformation.
Okay, so stay the course versus slam on the brakes. What does that actually look like in real life?
Exactly. So the path of inertia, that's basically the business as usual scenario, the path we're currently on. And it leads to a future where global temperatures rise well beyond that 2°C mark.
Right, that 2-degree threshold we always hear about, because once we cross that line, that's when things get really hairy, right?
Exactly. That's where those irreversible tipping points come into play. And the report highlights one in particular, the West Antarctic ice sheet. If that ice sheet collapses, and on our current trajectory, it's a very real possibility, we're talking about, well, multi-meter sea level rise.
And that's meters, plural, not just centimeters.
Meters, plural, and potentially within just a few centuries.
Centuries might sound like a long way off, but geologically speaking, that's nothing. And it's almost impossible to imagine the kind of displacement, the social and economic upheaval that would cause. Coastal cities gone, entire island nations wiped off the map.
It's not a pretty picture, but the report doesn't leave us there. It also outlines the path of radical transformation. And it's just what it sounds like, a complete overhaul of our energy systems, our economies, our whole way of thinking.
Okay, so radical transformation, give me the rundown. What does that actually look like?
Imagine this 80% of global energy from renewable sources by 2030. That means a complete shift to solar, wind, geothermal, phasing out fossil fuels almost entirely.
Wow, that's a tall order, especially in such a short time frame.
It's a massive undertaking, there's no denying that. But the report argues that the cost of inaction is far greater than the investment needed for this kind of transformation.
It's daunting, for sure, but there's something kind of inspiring about it, too, right? Like, if we could actually pull this off, if we could overcome all the challenges and make that shift, what a testament to human ingenuity.
Absolutely. It would require global cooperation on a scale we've never seen before, a willingness to share resources, knowledge, technology. And it's not just about the technology either. It's about changing our mindsets, our consumption patterns, our entire relationship with the natural world.
It makes you realize this isn't just about saving the planet. It's about creating a future where everyone has a chance to thrive, to live sustainably.
Exactly. And that's a message that I think resonates far beyond the scientific data. It's a call to action, an invitation to imagine a different kind of future, and then to actually go out and create it.
So where do we even begin? I mean, faced with these seemingly insurmountable challenges, what can we as individuals actually do?
That's the question, isn't it? And the report reminds us that the solutions are within our reach. It's about recognizing our own agency, our collective power, demand action from our leaders, make conscious choices in our own lives, support businesses and organizations that are working toward a more sustainable future.
Because every action, no matter how small, it creates momentum, it ripples outwards. That's something I'm definitely taking away from this deep dive, that's for sure. So listener, as you go about your day, as you navigate this complex world, what resonates most with you? What will you do with the knowledge you've gained?